Welcome back to the Lumiose Post, where we talk about all things Pokemon, and today we're going to be talking about some really drastic design changes that we've seen or heard about from the Pokemon world and the Pokemon development process. It makes sense that, you know, as they're designing these Pokemon, there will be some beta designs that they're like, oh, this is nice, but let's maybe tweak this up a little bit. And, you know, most of it is exactly that. It's very small design changes that these Pokemon go through to get to the final product we know today. However, every once in a while, there's some Pokemon that we'll see the beta designs for, we'll hear about the beta designs for, and the difference is so drastic, it's practically two completely different Pokemon, rather than like a beta design and then a regular design. So let's begin with what I believe is the most popular, at least well-known one, and that is the Latias and Blaziken fusion that used to exist. So before we had Blaziken, the fire starter of Generation 3, and Latias, one of the legendaries of Generation 3, we had this weird design that is a mix of both. It was depicted with this blue-haired character riding on it, and we never saw this blue-haired character appear in Hoenn either. So this one's so neat because not only is it a completely different design from Blaziken and a completely different design from Latias, but it also, the story behind it almost seems to like imply a completely different I guess, game or plot that we could have had in Gen 3. I mean, there is the fact that, you know, when you look at Latias and Latios, they are a red Pokemon and a blue Pokemon. So perhaps at one point, this Blaziken design, there was a blue version of it that was the Latios, and maybe even these were the mascot Pokemon of the Generation 3 game. So Ruby and Sapphire's mascots would have been this Blaziken Latios thing and this Blaziken Latios thing, and then you would have you know, for Ruby and for Sapphire. So I don't even know what the Emerald would be. Would it be a green version of this? I don't know, but you know, maybe that's not the case. Maybe even this was originally the fire starter. Maybe the fire starter initially was Latias and Blaziken mixed together. But either way, it is just interesting to think that, you know, instead of Latias being this Pokemon that went through a design change, there was actually a Pokemon that ended up becoming a legendary, and part of it ended up becoming a starter. And that is super weird and crazy, and I'm really curious if this has ever happened with another Pokemon. We may never know, is the sad thing, but either way, I think that's really, really cool. This Latias Blaziken hybrid is definitely one of the coolest beta Pokemon, and you know, it's like our first Pokemon fusion, right? Now, for this next one, we actually have the Jodo starters. The Jodo starters were initially very, very different. We did have Chikorita. It existed, but it was this weird little blob thing, and it evolved into this weird little flower thing, definitely very different from Bayleaf. But then when you look over at the Totodile and Cyndaquil lines, they're practically non-existent. This Totodile line was this Plesiosaur line, which is really cool, by the way, and I love Totodile, and I'm very happy we ended up with Totodile, but if they ever want to bring this design back, that would be totally cool with me. But then Cyndaquil, there was no Cyndaquil, it was actually this bear line, and Cyndaquil instead may have been just some random Pokemon in the game that had a different type, that had actual spikes instead of fire. So this is again very similar to the Latias Blaziken situation, just very interesting because of how just much this meant for the game's changes over time, you know? I mean, they initially had Cyndaquil just be this regular Pokemon and decide, no, this should be a starter. And then it's quite possible they took this bear and went, maybe we should rework this into a common Pokemon in the game, and this became Teddiursa. And then with Totodile, for some reason, this Plesiosaur just wasn't cutting for them at all, and they said, you know, let's scrap this, and let's bring in Totodile. I wonder if maybe this is partly because this Plesiosaur was perhaps too similar to Lugia, maybe they just wanted more of a difference between the starter and the legendary. That's like the only conclusion I can come to for why they would scrap this design, because I think it is so good. Again, very happy we ended up with Totodile out of it. I mean, I'd be super, super upset if they had replaced this thing with like Sobble. But yeah, it's super cool. I love that there were once a completely different starter lineup for Gen 2. I'm very happy with the new ones. And I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this. Would you have preferred the original starter lineup of Gen 2, or would you have preferred what we got in the end with Cyndaquil, Totodile, and Chikorita? Now, moving into the next Pokemon, we have, and this one's a little bit different, Umbreon. While this one did not go through a drastic design change, it did go through a drastic change that is even referenced in its current typing, or current dex entry rather. Its former typing is what's being referenced. So this is Umbreon. Umbreon is a dark type evolution that we have today, but it used to not be a dark type. It used to be a poison type. Initially, the Gen 2 games were going to give us Espeon as our psychic type evolution, whichever you want to say. There's going to be this grass one, Leafeon. Yeah, that's right. Leafeon was initially a Gen 2 Pokemon. And then there was going to be a poison type in Umbreon. Now, this kind of makes sense when you think about it, because the original Gen 1 evolutions, they formed a chain, right? Jolteon beats Vaporeon, Vaporeon beats Flareon. So the Gen 2 ones would have done the same thing, with Espeon beating Umbreon, since Umbreon would be poison type, and then Umbreon beating Leafeon, poison beating grass. And instead, they ended up giving Umbreon the dark typing and had Umbreon beat Espeon, and then they just moved Leafeon out of the equation altogether, but we ended up getting it in Gen 4. Now, another really interesting thing about this is that, you know, this makes me wonder if maybe we didn't have the dark type initially. You know, the dark type was added in Gen 2 alongside the steel type. So maybe they had initially just no plans to add a new type, and they just had the poison type Umbreon and the psychic type Espeon, this grass type Leafeon, and they eventually, as they started conceptualizing the dark type, went, you know, this would probably work really well alongside an evolution, so let's change this Umbreon Pokemon to a dark type, and because Leafeon no longer fits into the chain, we'll just scrap that altogether. Another really neat thing about this is referenced in Umbreon's dex entries today. If you look at Umbreon's dex entries, it talks about, like, ever since Gen 2, how its sweat is poisonous, or it can, like, secrete poison or whatever. All of this being a reference to its original typing. And one of the most popular sets that used to be run on Umbreon was Umbreon with Toxic. Now, Toxic is no longer a TM, so you can't really run Umbreon with Toxic anymore, but I think it would be really cool if they actually gave Umbreon access to Toxic naturally, just as kind of a reference to this original typing, and because it does fit well with the dex entries that we have. Now, moving into the next two, we move into the Sinnoh legendaries and Arceus. I kind of include him in that, but first we have Giratina. Giratina used to look completely different. As you can see here, Giratina used to be this weird orange, almost tiger-like creature. And, you know, the really interesting thing about this is I actually kind of wonder if maybe this ended up down the line becoming Landorus Therian form. We know there's several times where they scrap Pokemon and bring them back for another generation down the road. You know, I just mentioned how Leafeon was originally a Gen 2 Pokemon. Gastrodon was originally in Gen 3. You had Go-Goat was originally Gen 5, and so many others. And if you want me to do a whole video on, like, designs that were supposed to come earlier, let me know in the comments below, because I think that would be a fun video to make, and I'd love to do it, but only if you guys are interested. But yeah, it seems that this could have been the case for Giratina too, with them scrapping this Giratina beta design and coming up with the Giratina we know today, and then making this Giratina design perhaps the inspiration for Landorus Therian form, of course tweaked up down the road. It also kind of is interesting that Giratina is a Pokemon that can change between two forms, and Landorus is also a Pokemon that can change between two forms. Both legendary, even if one's sub-legend and one's a big legend. So I kind of wonder if maybe even this Landorus Therian beta form of Giratina was supposed to be the origin form, actually. Or not the origin form, but the distorted form, you know? Is that the origin form? Yes, it's the origin form. If it's supposed to be the origin form. But yeah, I I think that it's really neat that this could have been a Landorus-looking Pokemon. Imagining Giratina as a Landorus Therian form is super weird. Then you do also have the fact that they kind of tied Landorus and the Kami Quartet into Legends Arceus, which also Giratina did play a big role in. So I don't know, it's just weird that there's a lot of coincidences that these Pokemon share, including potentially a beta design. Now we have Arceus. Arceus is the god of Pokemon, right? So it makes sense that they'd probably go through many different designs. Like, I feel like this Pokemon probably went through more design changes of any Pokemon, because they're literally having to come up with a concept of God. And the first one I actually think is better than the one we have now, and that is this weird little cloud with eyes. And yeah, I know it's simple, but if you really think about it, this kind of makes sense for a godlike Pokemon. Because, or not even godlike, but what is supposed to be God in Pokemon. Because if you think about it, it's really hard for us to conceptualize what a god would look like, right? You know, because you have to be able to imagine something immortal, eternal, predating the universe, and yet you're mortal. So you literally can't wrap your head around that. It's the same reason people have a hard time wrapping their heads around the concepts of heaven or hell or any kind of afterlife, you know? But yeah, I think that this kind of cloudy idea would really have captured that. It would have, you know, invoked that mystery of, you know, what is God, you know? Man, I really like this. My kind of headcanon is that this is actually what Arceus would look like, and that the Arceus we have today is just a piece of that. You know, it's just like the Earth version of it, an avatar for it, if you will. I've actually, fun fact, done a whole theory video on this, and then I scrapped it because I sounded like I was on LSD the whole time. Like, it was just a crazy whack job theory. But who knows, maybe I'll bring it back if you guys are interested. That video is long gone. I deleted that a long time ago, but I'd be happy to make another one if you all were interested. Either way, I think it's super neat that Arceus originally had just this super simple design that, to me at least, is even more powerful than its current design. Maybe even the plates would have just had this thing be different colors. I don't know. It's really cool. I love that Arceus has a beta design that's this mysterious. And for our last one, we have another Pokemon that, like Umbreon, references its original design, and this is Hydreigon. Now, this one doesn't reference the design in its dex entries like Umbreon, but it does in its actual design. So, originally, the Hydreigon line was supposed to be inspired by tanks. They were going to make a tank Pokemon. I don't know why they ended up going, no, let's not do a tank, let's do a Hydra. You know, I don't get the connection there. But if you look at Hydreigon's designs, you can see these little tread marks on it, and this is all from the tank design. It's a reference to, like, the tread marks of a tank, because that's what Hydreigon initially was. And so it's just crazy to think not only were they able to reference this in Hydreigon's design, which is really cool, especially when, like, you know, they won't always reveal this beta information, so you have to think this is kind of like, almost like an inside joke amongst the artists, right? But it's also just kind of crazy to think that this was supposed to be a tank at one point. But yeah, be sure to let me know in the comments below which of these is your favorite. Which Pokemon do you think had, like, the most drastic beta to final design change? Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss our future Pokemon videos. Again, I'd love to do more stuff with the beta Pokemon. They are so interesting. I also, you know, just love making fun theory videos and all kinds of videos about the Pokemon franchise and world, so you won't miss that. And until next time, I will see all of you later.